Welcome, everybody. If I didn't introduce myself in the walk down here, my name is Steve Romig. I've been at FileMaker for quite a while. I'm the new Rosemary again, for those of you who have been to these meetings before. She's relocated to the East Coast, so I volunteered to take her place hosting these meetings. I have a bit of a interesting past here for those of you who aren't familiar with me. I started in tech support way back when FileMaker was called Clara. So I was on the support team when we split out Windows support and Macintosh support. So I was one of the few people on the Windows platform taking calls. Maybe I talked to some of you guys, I don't know. And I did that for a few years. And then I had an opportunity to move into our training department, which trained our tech support and our sales staff all around the world. Far and away my most favorite gig of all time. That lasted about 1.5 years. And then when Clara became FileMaker and we reorganized quite a bit, they let go a lot of people, including the entire training department. So I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding. So I left. And a few years later, when FileMaker 6 was becoming FileMaker 7 and the file format changed, we made a few changes to that. I came back as a contractor to help document all the changes that were gonna happen with your file. And that contract lasted about 1.5 years. Then I got shown the door again. And then 12 years ago, I got a call from Delphina Daves, who at the time was part of our developer relations group. And I came back in her group. So for several years, I was responsible in part for the developers conference. And then for a brief period of time, I moved into product management. And then for the last 8 years or so, I've been working in the support group, but not doing support stuff. I do training, which I love, and writing, which I love. So if you add up all the time that I've been in either this building or the other building, it's been about 15 or 16 years, but it's spread out way longer than that. So I've seen everything, you know, and I enjoy going to the conferences, hanging out with a lot of you guys, but that's not what you're here for today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yep.
And I'm going to keep running back and forth and see if anyone else has shown up. So enjoy. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thanks.
Good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am, no, not so good. 1 second while I just sort this presentation. I am Kevin Miller, Chief Executive of LiveCode. I'm over here all of the way from Edinburgh, Scotland. This is the 4th city I'm doing on a 13-city tour of FileMaker user groups. So hopefully by the time I get to the end of all of the user groups, I might actually know my presentation. I'm here today to talk about LCFM Native, which is our tool for taking a FileMaker solution and building a native app with it. So before we get into that, I'll just give you a little bit of background on who we are as a company, and that gives you some context and understanding as to how it is that we are able to do this particular product. So LiveCode has been a multi-platform development environment since the early 2000s. So we've got a sort of 15, 20-year history as a multi-platform development framework. And our customers include NASA, KLM use it in the back end of their flight booking system. There's lots of consumer apps, multimedia apps, so all kinds of things that have been built in LiveCode across a really wide range of different industries. So we have a technology which covers a lot of the FileMaker feature set already, and that's how we're able to do what we're doing with LCFM Native. And it also gives us a lot of experience in this space and understanding. Yeah. What you're not seeing? You're not seeing the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just have a quick look at the settings. 1 moment.
Maybe it's not sure.
I definitely told it to share. I shall tell. I am not. Let's try again.
Yeah.
Is that working now?
Cool. Thank you.
I just need to minimize GoToMeeting. I can't see my own. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, is that working now?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So we have a lot of experience, and a lot of our community are also small developers, independent developers that are used to being quite inventive and solving problems. So there's a real ethos fit between the two products, and I'll come back to that in a little while. So what was the impetus? What's the reason? Why are we doing LCFM Native, and why do you need to care about it? Well, the primary reason, the most important statistic is this one. It's 86%, which is, of course, the market share for Android devices and Android operating system, and that's from August 2017. That market share has stayed relatively stable since then, and that's the worldwide figure. In the US, I think it's somewhere closer to a 50-50 split. What that means for you is that your current clients or your future clients are almost certainly going to be using a mixture of both devices, and so it is almost essential that you are able to deploy across both of those devices. In some industries, because these devices are a lot cheaper, it's just not cost effective to use iOS devices. iPads start at $29, an Android tablet starts at $50. So there's a real cost consideration here as well. So what is LCFM Native? What have we built? Well, LCFM Native, the steps that you go through is that you take your existing FileMaker file and you drag and drop it onto our tool to compile it. And I'll show you a demo video that I've got in a few minutes of this process. What you get out of that process is a native app, which you can deploy either via the various app stores, or you can deploy it directly. Remember that in the Android ecosystem, you don't have to go through the Google Play Store. You can just install apps directly onto the device, unlike the Apple side, where it's much more of a walled garden. Your data stays in FileMaker Server or FileMaker Cloud. So we're not taking you away from FileMaker. If you've got your iOS app deployed using FM Go, then that just continues to work in exactly the same way. And you can continue, therefore, to use all of your existing FileMaker knowledge. So you remain in FileMaker, you continue to use it as the development platform. We're not taking you out of FileMaker. That's the development environment that you use to build essentially your native app. But the other thing that we're adding, and I'll come back to this and talk a bit more about what this gives you later, is that you do get complete access to the operating system with LCFM Native. We're using the FileMaker feature of extended script steps, which is this ability to extend the FileMaker editor to put commands in that allow you to access some of the capabilities that LiveCode has as a platform, which allow you to access any native device feature or library or incorporate other objects or controls. There's quite a variety of things that you can do there. Now, if you need to access HealthKit on iOS, Fit on Android, for example, then you would add an extended script step for that in the FileMaker editor. And then at the point where your application gets compiled, the script step will magically start to work. So I mentioned device costs. It really is worth thinking about this. If you've got a 100-seat, 500-seat, 1,000-seat client, the difference in terms of the hardware costs are enormous. In some industries, they just can't afford to put in that many iPads, and in other industries, they're not the best solution. I was talking to a company in DevCon, their construction company, and they have deployed all these iPads into the field. And the drivers, despite lots of training, keep leaving these iPads on the wheels of the truck and then drive off. And they've just written off a $500 or $800 device. So they're very, very keen to find a lower cost ways, less risky ways, so they don't have this turnover of hardware. So, it just depends. An iPad's a great, great device. I have one myself, but it just depends on what your industry is and what you need to do. However, in addition to the support for Android, we will support all modern OSs. So you will also be able to deploy your FileMaker solution as a native app on Linux, as well as Windows and Mac, and on iOS. Now, why would you want to deploy your FileMaker solution on Mac, given that you can already deploy on Mac using FileMaker? Well, because you get a native app, you get full access to the operating system. You also get online, offline syncing modes, which I'll come and talk about in just a few seconds. So this is all about taking everything that you can do that's wonderful in FileMaker and letting you deliver a better user experience to your customer. And so that is how it works. We are building in syncing into this tool from the very, very start. Everything that we're doing here is using the FM data API. And if you think about it, there's 2 million apps in each app store at the moment, and the ones that get the top ratings and the ones that are being really successful are the ones that work really well offline. It's expected. It's expected that if you're driving somewhere and you temporarily lose coverage, the app doesn't stop working. So our tool will allow you to work offline in the default mode, and it will queue the instructions. That's the most basic form of syncing. It queues the instructions, waits until it gets a connection, and then sends that information back to FileMaker when it gets a chance to do that. It will be configurable. There'll be a few different modes. So if you've got a fairly complex solution, you may need to think about it a little bit. You'll be able to do things like configure how conflict resolution works. Does the user choose if there's conflict, or is it always the most recent, or how is it that you're gonna handle that? So again, it's about providing an experience which is almost expected in today's apps, and it's something that we will be including out of the box. So all of your FileMaker scripts, everything in it, are compiled into LiveCode automatically. So all of the script steps, functions will compile. You don't have to know anything about that process. That's something that we do behind the scenes. And the FileMaker server scripts stay in FileMaker server, so you can still do perform script in the same way. All of that stuff will run exactly as you would expect. And we will be covering 100% of the FileMaker feature, so there will not be anything that doesn't work or isn't implemented. As I mentioned at the start, LiveCode is a kind of superset of the FileMaker feature set. So the challenge for us was more to make every feature work exactly like it works in FileMaker, rather than having to implement the whole thing from scratch. But we have essentially built a FileMaker in order to be able to run it as a native app. And then optionally, you can add native capabilities from the operating system. I'll come back and talk about that in a moment. But the idea is that you have one source solution, so you build almost everything you need in FileMaker, and then just add that one piece of functionality you need in compile time. So I've got a demo video here which shows it in operation, and I'm just going to talk through this to let you understand how this works. So this is a it's not coming up on my screen. This is a FileMaker Platinum partner in London. It's a real solution. It's a solution for auditing, so it's a kind of questionnaire app where you go through and you check off whether cleaning tasks have been done or whether the building is in the right state of maintenance. So there's checklists, there's a signature component to sign off. You drag drop your solution onto our compiler, and then you enter your username and password. And you have to enter the password for the whole solution to allow you to access everything, because the compiler is obviously going to pull every last thing out of your solution. And then as soon as we hit that next button to move forward, you'll see FileMaker load up, but we're not now actually doing anything. The user's not doing anything. We're using the Apple accessibility framework to drive FileMaker. And the first thing that we do is we go and we save out a copy of the DDR. So there we've entered in that username and password that we put in. We're looking at those dialogues as they come up and dismissing them, and we're saving out the DDR report. And the DDR gives us part of the information to do this. It's not complete, so I'll show you how we complete it after this. But this gives us a fair amount of information from FileMaker. So that's it saving out that report. And it does a little bit of parsing on that report to get a kind of overview of your project. And then we come back into the tool, and it comes up and displays for us a list of all of the layouts in your solution. So the idea here is that you choose only the layouts that you want to compile. Obviously, if you're building a mobile app, as we're going to demonstrate in this example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the iPhone layouts that we have. They're a very similar form factor to Android, so they probably scale and look quite good on Android. So we choose those, and we choose the initial layout. What's the layout that we want first when we load up, and then we go back into LCFM Native. And so again, we're now driving FileMaker, so you just have to sit back and grab a cup of coffee. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes to do this. I've obviously shortened the sequence for this video, and I have to watch the whole thing. But what we do is we go through each layout, and there's quite a lot of information that's essential that's actually missing from the DDR. So you don't get information, for example, about all of the CSS styles. You don't get information about part sizes. There's various other aspects of it that you can't get any other way. So we take it into edit mode for each of the layouts that you selected, and then run through those layouts. And what we do is we copy each one onto the system clipboard, and the XML on the clipboard has a complete representation of the object with all the coordinates and everything that we need. So we pull that in the background and we augment the DDR with all of the missing information so that we have everything. So you can see it there just working its way through this particular layout and literally just selecting and copying all of the objects so that we have all of this information. So it's quite an involved process. We did consider reverse engineering the file format. I think we might do that for version 2. It might be easier. But this is the way that we've gone through doing it at the moment. It does have the drawback that your computer is kind of locked up during this process, but we'll see if we can improve it in a future version. So in this beta, you know, we have access for Android and Mac, as I say, the other operating systems are coming. So you configure the app that you're going to build, put in things like the identifier, version number, the application icon. You can also set the minimum Android version. We go right back to 4.1 Jelly Bean. I would strongly recommend that you use the latest version of Android you can get away with because it's a moving target. You've got more devices to test if you support the older operating systems. It's a real headache. So you're better to take the latest versions of that. And you can do something similar for Mac here, so you can configure the application icon and on all of it. So this is an Android device, just remote viewing onto my Mac so that we get the screencast. And here we have the app. These are the iPhone layouts of the same app that I showed you earlier. This is connecting back to FileMaker server, so the data is in FileMaker server. And we are able now to log into that in exactly the same way as we were on the desktop on the device. It then comes up with the same view, so that's the menu there, the various different layouts. The checklist option is there. The questionnaire option. And then at the end, we have a signature component. And just to demo that it works, I will now I recorded putting in what is probably the world's worst attempt at a signature. But it just demonstrates that it does work. And so that's it. So you have now an Android app that runs the FileMaker feature set. So as I say, other platforms are coming very shortly. Just to give you an idea where we are at in this process. So the product's currently at beta 2. We've been at beta 2 for a number of months, and beta 3 is quite a major rework. We've gone through and learned a lot of lessons and been running this. We've got 20, 25 or so real-world solutions, some of them very large, up to hundreds of layouts and you know, really large data sets. So we've learned a huge amount over the last few months, and we've reworked essentially how the compiler and parser and code works to the point where we're getting to the point where we're really very, very happy with it. So we've got 1 or 2 real-world solutions in production. Yes, we do. Yes, not as many as we would like yet, but I think when we get to beta 3, a lot of things will work. So beta 3 will cover about 90% of the FileMaker feature set, and we've picked the most important aspects first. There's just a number of edge features and functionalities which we haven't got in beta 3. It will come out sometime in the next few days. I was promised it for my tour. The engineers, I took that to mean the start of my tour. The engineers took it to mean, well, you're touring for January. No, they've been trying very hard to get it out. It's almost there. It's sitting at just over 90% complete at the moment. So 90% of the feature set. There will be new betas very fast, every week or two. In fact, after the beta 3, it's really a refinement phase at that point, and optimizing and improving it. And the syncing options in beta 3 will be relatively basic, so we'll be improving syncing between beta 3 and beta 4. But I would say that beta 3 is a good time to get on board. And so we're estimating shipping GM towards the end of Q1. That's the current estimated ship date. And I do have a few screenshots which we did from, this is the beta 3 compiler, which we took on Monday. And these are the FileMaker sample solutions. If you look closely at the screen, it is almost perfect. There's a tiny issue with the font metrics, just kind of halfway down on the left there, which we're tweaking. But it is pretty much, you would really be hard pressed. That could almost be a screenshot just from FileMaker itself. And then your next layout here, again, I mean, it's come out. It's pretty much spot on. I mean, these are coming through really, really nicely now. So we will work very hard to make it pixel perfect. We had a lot of fun implementing the FileMaker CSS. It's a little bit non-standard. We've implemented the quirks, we've implemented the bugs. We've just tried to make it work, really like FileMaker works. You can see on this layout here, there's a pattern background which scales, and that scales exactly the same way it looks. Very, very similar to how it looks in FileMaker. So to talk a little bit more about the extended script steps feature. So it's worth thinking a little bit about the sort of capabilities of the two different platforms. Yes, both platforms build multi-platform applications, and both of them are sometimes used for similar apps, but in reality, they're more complementary than they are competitive. FileMaker, for example, has got very good data definition tools that let you drag out data layouts, and that defines how your data actually works. In LiveCode, of course, you can build data-built apps, but you actually have to code. You have to create an SQL database, you have to write the code, you have to do all of the connections. There's a lot more work. So when it comes to building apps for business that are data-driven, FileMaker is faster and it's better, and you're using it for a very good reason. The thing that's really interesting about LiveCode is that it's more used for apps that are more interactive. It's used for apps where there's more customization, where you need to access the operating system, all the areas where FileMaker isn't as strong. So for example, in LiveCode, we have this concept of widgets, which is a way of defining your own objects. And those objects can render with SVG, those objects can go out to the operating system and pull in an object. If you can imagine a control, then you can build it in LiveCode. And similarly, there's lots of controls out there. There's engines for doing animation, there's engines for manipulating SVG and for manipulating images, but also other things on the data side that are potentially interesting, like tree view objects and various other ways of representing data. So all of that stuff is in LiveCode. And the idea here is that rather than you having to learn a whole new environment and learn every last thing about LiveCode in order to build your app and then spend lots of time redoing work in FileMaker, the idea is that instead what you do is you just go, well, I just need that one extra feature. Just need to access Google Fit on Android, or just need to access HealthKit on iOS. So I go onto the LiveCode forums, I ask the question, there might be a library, or I go and ask, or I go and work out how to do it, and I just work out how to do that one feature, not the whole thing. I just need to write that one little thing, or I need to write that one control that I need to add into my FileMaker solution, or that one layout that I can't do in FileMaker, or that one piece of interactivity, or whatever it is. And you can define that and you can build that in LiveCode, and then you tell the compiler where you want to insert that. And it's not just a case of inserting script steps. It is also a case you can actually insert full LiveCode screens. So all of the objects, the controls, the ability to do interactive multimedia, all of these things that LiveCode can do. So you build that one piece, and then you say in your FileMaker script step, so when we get to this point, just go to that screen, essentially, and then that gets pulled in at compile time. So we're allowing you to keep all of that knowledge that you have and all of the wonderful FileMaker solutions and all of the very rapid engineering that it does. You're not coming out of FileMaker, but when it comes to adding other things, suddenly you have this incredible ability to customize and this ability to produce really high-functioning native apps with an experience that you'd really want. I was asked the other day, for example, could you do analytics? It's hard in FileMaker to have analytics as to who's going where and doing what in your app. Now, of course, it's very important if you're trying to improve your experience, and it's something that a lot of our FileMaker customers do. Well, there is a library to incorporate Google Analytics into LiveCode. So can we expose that for you? Maybe not in version 1 of the compiler, but it's certainly something that we can add very easily and give you that sort of capability. So there's going to be lots of ways that we can add to FileMaker over a period of time to give you quite a number of different capabilities that you don't have already. So what does the pricing look like at the moment? I'm going to run through this, and I'm also going to run through a kind of worked price example of the total cost of ownership, because actually you save quite a lot of money at various points in the process here. So we have pricing at the moment that's in beta. It will probably go up a little bit. This has been one of the most expensive engineering projects we've ever undertaken as a company. But at the moment, anyway, during beta. So it's $499 to buy the compiler. It's an annual subscription. All of these are annual prices. And that includes 5 seats. So for your developers or to test different apps or whatever, or if you're just a really small organization. And then it starts for $2 per month per named user, which is billed annually. We use the data API to connect to FileMaker, and that's a very, very efficient way from a FileMaker licensing perspective. So I'll come on and show you what that might look like in an example in a moment. We also have concurrent user pricing options. So if you don't want to go down the named user route, then concurrent is 3 times the price. So we've really just mirrored the FileMaker model here. But we also do offline or per app pricing. Now, an offline app in our book is any app that doesn't connect back to FileMaker. So if your app is completely offline and has all the data locally, or I know some people that have, for whatever reason, used FileMaker to build a front end to some other system, as far as we're concerned, those are offline apps. And we don't charge per user for those. We just charge annually per app as a flat pricing. So it's suitable for certain types of vertical and certain types of app. But that's how we define that. And that also allows you to do everything that you could do with the FileMaker runtime, which I know is being deprecated. It means that you could even build those apps for Linux or for other platforms, and they can connect back to FileMaker or they can not connect back to FileMaker. It's completely up to you in terms of how it goes and what you want to do with it. So just to give you an idea of what this means, just to, I think it's just important to try and bring this home. So this is an example. Imagine that you have a client with 50 named users. So this is what it looks like at the moment. You're looking at $6,600 in annual FileMaker licensing. You also need to buy 50 entry-level 9.4-inch iPads for $329 each, for another $16,450. So that gives you a total of $23,000 in costs for that 50 users. With LCFM Native, so the first thing to say is that LCFM Native uses the data API. So FileMaker don't track the number of connections, they track the amount of data. And I've been over this with the FileMaker sales team, so I know I've got this right. And so they give you 24 gigabytes of data. It's 2 gigabytes of data per user per month, 24 gigabytes per user annually. And that's data that you're downloading. It's not data that you're uploading. And it's not data in containers. So it's not the images, it's not the videos, the things that take huge amounts. So it's a pretty generous data allowance. So I would guess, and we don't know because your application is going to vary, but I would guess you might well be able to get away with a 20 user pack, which would come with 450 gigabytes of data transfer annually. And so that would take your annual FileMaker licensing costs down to $3,360. And then your client buys Galaxy tabs, 9.6 inch. Now, I picked one that's $134.95 here. There are tablets for $50. I could have pushed this even further, but the Samsung Galaxy Tab is a decent one. It's not like the complete entry level. It's a perfectly good, fully functional tablet. It'll work well for a lot of these sorts of applications that get built with FileMaker. And then you have your LCFM annual license for 50 users, which is $1,714. So you now have a total of $11,800. It's roughly half the cost. And that's more money that your client can spend on development. That's more clients that you can attract because it's more cost effective. So it has a real impact. And if you need to buy additional data from FileMaker, as I'm sure some of you will, if you've got really data intensive prices, it's better priced. It's $60 for 24 gigabytes annually. So you can very quickly scale up your use of FileMaker in that sense. So it's really worth thinking about that. You've got access to 5 times the market on Android. So from a FileMaker perspective, I think it'll be really beneficial in terms of the numbers of users that will come in as a result of doing that. But you'll also be able to be more cost effective and competitive if you go down this route. So why get on board just now? To ensure everything that works perfectly with your solution, we need feedback. As I say, we've got 25 real-world solutions. 1 or 2 of them are now deploying successfully. Almost all of those will work by the time we get to beta 3. But we do want your feedback. If you go and run your solution and there are issues, now is the time. Or by now, I mean as soon as beta 3 comes out the door. And as I mentioned, the pricing, as we've set it up at the moment, is beta. So prices are going to go up a bit on our user packs. We will lock in the prices though. If you buy the compiler and user packs during the beta, then we will lock your price in perpetuity as a thank you for getting involved early on. And the other thing I would say is that We normally have a 30-day money-back guarantee, and we've extended that to 30 days after version 1 ships. So there's no risk there. And we do have a pricing calculator up on our website, which allows you to go in and get a quote and understand what this is going to cost with the different options between concurrent users and not concurrent users and so on. So in summary, the whole idea here is to use the existing FileMaker solutions knowledge to create outstanding custom interactive apps that are completely native, to deploy to all app platforms, including Android, which is 86% of the mobile market now, to save money and to reach more customers. And I now have a bit of time for questions. Yes?
I platform scanning features. Yeah,
I can just repeat the question, it's okay. So the question for those of you who are viewing on the webinar was that the iPhone has barcode scanning features, and will that still be available? The answer is yes, it will. And in fact, we implemented multi-barcode scanning, I think even before FileMaker did it. So yeah, it will. If the feature is in FileMaker, then it will be in LCFM Native. So yes, it does already work.
Can I bring up the question I asked? By email?
Say again?
Can I bring up that question I asked by email?
The question about DevCon to go?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Please ask.
So I thought that maybe the best demo you could possibly give would be show up at DevCon to go
with an Android app.
Yeah, an Android
Yeah.
app that
So,
otherwise they wouldn't be able to use.
so the question for those of you on the webinar was, could we do the DevCon to go app on Android? So we will do that at this year's conference, assuming it's unlocked like it was last year. And yeah, we'll definitely build it.
And figuring out how that, because that's not using server or anything. How are you going to?
Yeah, everything's local. Yeah, so how are we storing the data locally? So we replicate all of the data locally. If it's a local app, we have our own data store and algorithms. There may be a bit of SQLite involved. There's a few other things that we do. But if your data is local, then it runs locally. We have that working. Yeah.
Like take notes. And,
yeah, you'll be able to.
There's some tricky things.
Yeah, there are.
Synchronizing with something, who knows out there. And
Yeah. It will all work. It will be in perfect shape by DevCon. I'm absolutely sure about that.
Last year they did deliver to us the same week.
Yeah, it wasn't, and we only got beta 2 out just at the time of DevCon, and to be honest, it just wasn't. The app was too advanced for the compiler at that stage. But beta 3 will pretty much handle it, I would say. I mean, it's been really fun implementing some of the FileMaker data features, because obviously FileMaker, it doesn't translate directly to an SQL database. It does a whole lot of things differently, or that an SQL database doesn't do. So we've had to build all of that essentially, but we have done it in order to do the local data store.
Does it have the potential of working with? Yeah, I guess that was protected in the iPhone, but does that have potential of working with the data that's in FileMaker Go?
So the question is, could it work with data that's in FileMaker Go? I don't think so, because the data is, no, in fact, definitely not, for two reasons. One, the data, I think, is protected and sandboxed on iOS, so you don't get access to that. And two, our data format is completely different internally. We're not using any of the FileMaker data structures.
But the data would be fine. So they've got the
So the question is, the data would be in the file. So yes, you're taking your file with all of the data in it, and then you're running it through the compiler, and then you're coming out with a native app which will still have all of your data in it. But it's in a different format. We're not using the FileMaker format at all on the device. Yeah.
One question I have is, how does some of the web viewers kind of transpose? Like, I mean, I gather it's just all JavaScript, and it would have a renderer for web component. Yeah. Just like the iOS has WebKit or whatever.
Yeah. So the question was, how does the web viewer work? It should work the same. We're using the same underlying technologies for our web view, at least on iOS. Obviously on Android, it's a different rendering framework, but all of the features, we've implemented all the same features. So the ability to choose to block user interaction and not block it, the ability to load the data, the little icon that comes up when it's secure, all of the things that FileMaker does as part of its web viewer, we have implemented. So it should work as identically as possible. And there may be tiny differences. And I mean, obviously, the underlying framework on Android is different to the Google rendering framework for web, but that's just the same as going between Safari and Chrome. So there might be some slight differences there. There's nothing, obviously, that we could do about those. But your JavaScript and all the rest of it should run just fine. And on iOS, it should be identical because we're using the same underlying architecture.
Could you discuss the syncing that you mentioned at the beginning of the talk? How it kind of syncs automatically?
So the question was, could I discuss the syncing that I talked about earlier? Yes. So there's quite a lot to get your head around, certainly from our perspective with FileMaker syncing, because obviously FileMaker by default only allows you to access one record in one window at a time, and it assumes that you have a connection. And so with that model, it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's pretty hard to get a sync conflict. Whereas we don't do that. We obviously allow you to edit or have multiple people trying to do that, and the app has to continue to work when you're offline. So there's a number of things that we do in order to do that. One of which is to simply take at its simplest, is to take the changes that you've made, queue them up, wait for an opportunity to send them, and then send them, and hopefully nobody else has modified that record. But we will provide options to allow you to choose how to deal with it if there is a conflict. So you'll be able to say, well, only the most recent record is the one that gets saved, or the user can choose between the two different records. There's a whole different varieties there. There will be a few places where it doesn't work well without a little bit of thinking or modification to your database, because if you have keys that increment, integer keys that automatically increment, because the device might be offline, we won't know the last number. Now, we may be able to work around that by rewriting it during the sync process if you create new records. There are some things like that. We're certainly going to put together a document with some recommendations. We'd recommend that you use UUIDs, for example, instead. That's a better way of structuring that. So there are some cases that we can't do perfectly and automatically. But for simple apps, we will be able to do it. And for more complex apps, and it's very similar. I mean, MirrorSync have got all sorts of options for doing syncing, and they work around the same issues, essentially, that we have to work around. The difference is just that we're building it into our platform. And in order to make it work, we build something called the gateway solution, which is an intermediate solution that sits between your application and FileMaker. So you upload it to your FileMaker server to sit alongside your solution. And we build that automatically. You don't need to know anything about that. But what that does is it connects back to your client with the data API, but there are various scripts and things on there which we use as part of synchronization to help try to get it right. And it also allows us to work around. There's a few limitations in the data API, like you can't do perform script on the server, I don't think. So again, we do that from the gateway solution. So that will work.
So if I'm working locally offline, how do I tell it what data I need to have locally? Because obviously I don't want to download the whole database.
So the question is, if I'm working locally offline, how do I tell it what data I want to have locally? So there's a few settings that you'll be able to put in the compiler around different tables. You can say it's a local only table, or it's a remote only table, or it's a table that should sync. There'll also be some hints where you'll be able to say, get the whole table or just get part of it. We'll put in some sensible defaults, so for the most part, it will hopefully be fairly intelligent, but you will be able to configure all of that on a table by table basis if you need to.
Sweet.
I guess in that sense, I guess some applications, it might not be suitable just because the data entry might move to a privileged data that exists and it doesn't have access to it.
So the question is, there may be some applications where it's not suitable because it has to have access to data that exists. Yeah, there will be some applications where, because of the way the application is designed, it has to have live access. And that's fine. You just have to, you just lose the syncing capability, but it'll still run. It's just, it'll be more like the current FileMaker experience. It will block and it will need a connection to run. But that's the worst case, really. There are some cases, and there's nothing you can do. If you need the server to have live access to change stuff as you're putting stuff in, then there's nothing we can do there.
So back to tag off his question about the web viewer.
Yes.
There are many things I don't know because I tend to be more high-end work as a client. But it seems to me some web pages don't work in the web viewer because they use iframes. That is something like that, or frames. I'm not sure what it's
Okay,
called.
so there's a question that.
And the question does it work when it's in the native app, where it doesn't work.
So there's a problem with using iframes in the FileMaker web viewer.
I think it uses frames and
It uses
pages
frames,
that can't use frames fail.
and so they don't work. Well, I am not entirely sure. I know that the LiveCode web viewer works with frames, so I can't imagine it wouldn't work. I mean, we are trying to replicate any bugs or limitations of FileMaker so that it works the same. That might be one that we don't. I don't think. I mean, it should work. I wasn't aware of that limitation in FileMaker, so I'm not absolutely certain. Yeah.
I think maybe iframes.
Could be, I can't remember. So.
I think some websites actually have security things built in so that they know if they're being used in a certain way. They're trying to avoid that.
Right.
But I think that's probably what we're running into. I mean, just about anything trying to do an iframe.
Right. So the assumption is that you're going to be using iframes just like FileMaker does.
I think the assumption is, but I'm not aware. I mean, if you write into our support team with your specific question in the page that doesn't work, we can have a look at it, because I know it works in the LiveCode native browser.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. No.
So it is only good for a single file, or you can package it into multiple files.
So the question is, does it only work with one file, or will it work with multiple files? It does work with multi-file solutions just fine. Yes, you can have a whole, there's no problem with that at all. Yeah, it works. We tested it. It was in the early, I think it's even in beta 2 that, yeah.
If we went to go design a app that for the app store, and we sold 10,000 million units, what does the pricing look like? Sharing that.
So the question is, if we create an app for the App Store and you sell 10,000 units, what does the pricing look like? So our pricing does go down a little bit when you have lots and lots of users. So it'll be a little bit less. We do still charge per user unless the app is offline, in which case, if the app is not connecting back to a FileMaker data store, then we would just charge for the app as a flat fee. But if it is connecting back to FileMaker, we kind of replicate the FileMaker model, which is to charge for the number of users and or the amount of data, essentially.
And is the flat fee a custom pricing? So you have to bring the app, just describe it, and then get the pricing.
So the question is the flat fee a custom price? So the flat fee ranges between $1,000 and $7,000 a year, depending on whether it's going to be a small app or an app that's going to take over the world. So that's the range.
7,000 for taking over the world.
Yeah, that's it. Annually.
Yeah.
Yeah. More questions?
How do we sign up?
How do you sign up? On FileMaker.livecode.com. I would wait for, I mean, go on there and get on our mailing list. I would wait for beta 3. Just look out for that. It's coming in the next few days. We don't need any more feedback on beta 2. We've rewritten so much of it. But come and get it there.
Would you have an app built in LiveCode that you could all use?
Do I have one with me today?
Yeah.
No, I don't. Sorry.
Nothing to download.
I don't have anything. I don't have anything to download today. We're kind of just at that point of wrapping this up. There will be apps though. We will put some apps up that work on the website. So keep an eye out for that. It's coming. We've got some blog posts drafted. We're just waiting for the tech to be ready. So a few more days on that. Yeah.
Nothing at home.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll let you know when they're ready. We'll do some of the starter solutions so that you can see how those work. They're easy to compile.
What kind of did you say you were doing?
We'll do some of the We'll put some of the starter solutions up as apps, just so as you can see them. Yeah, so you can see them work.
It's kind of a good way or the best way to learn how to use LiveCode with FileMaker.
What's a good way or best way to use LiveCode with FileMaker? To learn. LiveCode, there is it's dual license, so there's a free open source version, which is GPL. You can just download that and take it for a spin. And there's a commercial version, which is somewhere between $500 and $2,000 a year, just depending on what feature set that you need. But to be honest, to build components for your FileMaker solution, for the most part, the free version is probably going to be fine. You can be able to do that. There are tutorials, there are videos, there are forums, really active user community, so you can go up there and you can ask a question, you can work through the tutorials. There's an interactive tutorial in the product, there's documentation, there's a dictionary, 5,500 functions, it's fairly extensive. But there's lots of places to get started, and you'll find our community is very, very friendly. If you go to a LiveCode user group or a LiveCode conference, the ethos and the feeling in the room is very similar to a FileMaker community. It's kind of like FileMaker are the easy-to-use database tool. If you sort of think about databases, they are the easy-to-use tool versus all of the others. Well, on the programming side, that's what we are. LiveCode is the easy-to-use tool compared to the Javas and the C and all the rest of this world. So it's pretty easy to get into. I mean, I guess if you're familiar with AppleScript, if you think about the LiveCode language is quite like AppleScript, but if you imagine AppleScript with access to data, with access to UI, it runs cross-platform, it compiles to native code, it has access to the operating system, that's customizable objects, you're starting to get an idea of what LiveCode is. So it's quite straightforward to get into. And remember, you don't have to learn the whole thing. You're not replacing your whole FileMaker solution. You're just adding that feature that you need. So someone will help you if you post them to the forums. David's on the forums.
You can probably learn like 20 commands and do a lot of stuff. If command, yeah, you can get started. Very easy. And
But wait, if you're gonna talk extensively, David,
You don't need to.
that's not, that's
Yeah, it's only. I think the audio is only coming from the computer. Yeah.
And you might mention the conference, Kim.
I might mention the conference. Yeah, we do have. There is a LiveCode user conference coming up in San Jose in May, which is an excellent way to come and learn. And there'll be lots of. We always have a dedicated beginner track there, as well as lots of advanced topics, and you get to meet lots and lots of other users. So it's a good way to get into it.
Just be LiveCode, but also be featuring LCFM.
So the conference is focused primarily around LiveCode, but we'll definitely do a few sessions on LCFM. We've had a number of FileMaker users interested in the conference. So we'll do some. Conference is, I think it's $600 at the moment for the early bird, if I remember correctly. It could be out by $100. I can't remember. It's about that. Yeah. It's a 4-day conference.
People attend that.
How many people attend? It might be around 80, something like that. So yeah, I mean, we're a lot smaller than FileMaker, but it's a good number. You can speak to everybody. It's a friendly group. Any more questions? Got a bit more time if we want it. Yeah.
Just double check that FileMaker program after LiveCode can change itself as a standalone in Google Play.
So the question is, can you sell an application built like this in the Google Play Store? Yes, absolutely. Of course you can. Yes.
Standalone.
Sorry?
It's a standalone.
It's a standalone application. Yes. So it has its own icon, its own identifier, its own everything, and you can sell it in the Play Store. You can sell it in the Mac App Store. We include things like code signing, so all of that stuff works as you would expect. It's a proper native app that you get back on each platform. And that also has the advantage on desktop platforms, for example, in that you don't have to tell the customer that they need to download and install FileMaker and connect to a host and pull down the solution and all the rest of it. You can just go, here's the app, run it, and it's already configured and it already connects back up to the FileMaker server. So again, it's a better experience, better user experience.
So like, let's say it is connecting to a server.
Yes.
What does the connected user look like when you're on the server?
Using the API.
The data API?
So the question is, what does it look like on the server when you're connected back to the server? So we use the data API for all of this. So it doesn't use up your FileMaker connections in the way that a native FileMaker client would in terms of connection. So FileMaker just monitor the amount of data that you use instead. That's the limit that they put on it. That's how they charge for it.
So are you maintaining the connection token scratch, or just opening it and establishing it at every request?
So the question is, are we maintaining the connection token, or are we establishing it with every request? I do not know. Yeah, yeah.
But it's not doing the concurrency stuff.
No. But I mean, you're sending the data from the data API.
Yes, data from data API. Yes.
And because you know what layouts you're using,
yes.
Assuming you package it up so that it's going to be in the API.
Yes.
But anyway.
I'm sure we're using as little connection as we can. I would be very surprised if we keep reconnecting, but I honestly don't know at that level of detail how it works. I can find out if you need to know. Then if you email support@livecode.com, one of the engineers can tell you exactly how that works. Yeah.
That's the other question. If it's like, so you're authenticating. So how's the authentication piece work? Right? So like the user authenticates into the solution, but they're already compiled in a separate file. So like, you know how you have the user accounts in FileMaker.
Yes.
So how does the security work?
So how does
the security transpose?
So the question is, how does the security transpose? I don't know a huge amount about the details. I know that we're obviously using FileMaker's security essentially to allow you to access things on the server. I know that you do all of the logins. I mean, that solution that I demoed in the video has got a username and password. I'm not sure of the exact details, I'm afraid, of how we do all of that. But I know that we do it. And I know that we do things like, if you need encryption at rest on the client side, we do that as well. So it should be secure. If you have an app that is really, it has to be highly secure, you should be able to get it certified. There shouldn't be any problem. I mean, we've got LiveCode apps that store medical records and things like that. So it should be fine. I mean, we've done a lot of secure apps. But I don't know exactly how it works here. If you need to know, though, again, just write into support. One of the engineers will be more than happy to write you a small essay on that. It's probably a good subject for a blog post, because I had that question before, actually. So I might, if you look out in the next few weeks, I might get somebody just to put one up talking about that. Any other questions?
Yeah. What was your most interesting question from the other groups?
What was my most interesting question from the other groups? I think there was a question about whether we were trying to get people to migrate from FileMaker to LiveCode. The answer is no. And I think I explained that by talking about the relative different strengths of the two platforms. That was quite an interesting question. There was a question about WebDirect, which I wasn't expecting, about whether or not we could do web deployment and do it better, because obviously LiveCode does deploy to the web through HTML5, so we already have all of that technology. And I wasn't expecting that, because I thought people were absolutely fine with WebDirect for what it's good for. But apparently, the prospect of connecting through the data API and having a few additional web features and things like that is interesting. I can promise you it will not be in version 1, but it is something that we might have a look at. I wasn't expecting that. I had that question twice, actually, so it seems like there might be a gap there. I mean, one thing that we do differently, I guess, is we do render everything client side, HTML5, and I think WebDirect is not. I don't know too much about how it works, but I don't think it does it quite like that. So maybe things that we can add there, but I wasn't necessarily expecting that question. So, does anybody here have any thoughts on that? Is that something that might be useful for anybody? Web publishing, doing anything there, or is it? You don't do a lot of it, yeah. Just doesn't have the same capabilities as a native app, I don't think. But, yeah.
Do you have a LiveCode server then?
Do we have a LiveCode server? So yeah, well, we've got two different. So we've got LiveCode server, which is just a pure server platform that's faceless, that will run on a Linux box or on a Mac or whatever, or a Windows server, and that will process requests, whether that's from a web page or direct connections or sockets or database or whatever. And then we also have the HTML5 deployment, which is where we compile all of our technology to JavaScript. So you end up with a web page and your application running inside the web page as an HTML5 app. So those are the two web-related things that we do.
You made it this? Yeah, put you on the spot?
Well, actually, maybe I should mention a little something.
Oh, you have to stand up there.
Okay.
You need your mic.
Yeah, one of the talks, the talk I'm going to give at the LiveCode conference is showing how to take a LiveCode desktop app and actually displaying that on the web. And I'm using some technologies called Apache Guacamole and then the remote app functionality in a Windows server. So usually within a few seconds, I can basically have an app, a desktop app on a server up and running. And it is a desktop app. So I didn't have to go through all the difficult development tasks of building a web application, because that's challenging to do. I basically built a desktop app, get to use all the great functionality in LiveCode, and then I'm simply displaying it in the web browser. There are numerous technologies for doing that. I mean, there are various third-party products. Think of it as being something like terminal services, that kind of thing, where there are HTML5 clients from a number of different companies that can say, okay, you want to get into your server and you want to display it in a web browser. They have at various pricing levels a way to do that. And the way I've done it, and what I'll be showing at our conference, is a monthly cost for me of about $76 a month hosted on Google. And most of the other solutions out there are over $100 a month, and it goes up depending upon the number of users. But I wanted something that I could demo on my website. So that's why I spent some time to figure out how to do it. So basically, that is another way that you can have web functionality without completely rewriting everything. And so with the LiveCode HTML5 functionality, it is indeed compiling into JavaScript using emscripten. And so basically you're running that within the web browser. So that app comes down into the web browser and then runs in the web browser. And so the things that you can do inside of a web browser are pretty limited. You've got limitations on clipboard functionality and things like that for security reasons. And that's why I went and tried to do something different so that I could have an entire app running. Without the limitations of what's going on inside of a web browser. And indeed, I have used the HTML5 LiveCode feature to take a demo app and put it on my website. But what I've done, since then is I've basically worked on this new technology in order to say, boom, within 2 or 3 seconds, my app is loaded and running, in a web browser, and it's literally running on a Windows server in a Google data center. And so that's how I've implemented that.
You've been here doing FileMaker stuff for quite a while.
Yeah, I've been. Yeah.
It's coincidental, right, that you somehow got hooked up and started using LiveCode. What got you hooked on using LiveCode?
Well, what got me hooked on using LiveCode is that in the year 2001, the first version of LiveCode. Now they've had different names through the years, but let's just say the first version of LiveCode was made available, and I looked at it and said, well, I'm really interested in this. Well, why am I interested in it? Well, it's a cross-platform development environment. It's hard to do cross-platform development, and it's also based upon, if you look at the underlying syntax, it's basically hypertalk syntax. Like Kevin was saying, AppleScript type syntax. Well, it really goes all the way back to 1987, HyperCard. So your standard commands like put this into that, going all the way back, to HyperCard, that's the basis of the syntax. Very straightforward, very easy to use. And I saw that introduced on the Macintosh web page in 2001. I downloaded and I licensed it right away. And I built a couple of apps. At that time, I was an Oracle DBA, and I built a couple of apps to help me configure servers and set up Oracle servers. And there was a whole lot of code that I would normally have to write by hand, and I wrote code generators to do that.
And so those were my first apps that I built using LiveCode. Then what happened is I wrote an article too for O'Reilly because there was a version of Oracle which ran on the Mac OS for a while. It was kind of like a beta version. And I wrote an article about that, and I said, you know what? I wrote one article about how to set up and do that because I was an Oracle DBA. You know what? I bet people would like to have a tool to convert their data from FileMaker into Oracle. You know, that way we can use essentially FileMaker as a rapid application development environment for Oracle systems. And so that was my first version of FM Pro Migrator, just basically data only. And so once again, I started in 2001, you know, developing, you know, my apps with LiveCode. And then 2003, you know, I was doing these articles. Then I did like the first version of FM Pro Migrator.
I'm sure I did this. You use LiveCode to help you. FM Pro Migrator?
Yes, my FM Pro Migrator, all of my tools, all my desktop tools are built with LiveCode. Yes, so I write all of that code. The FM Pro Migrator as a tool contains over 120,000 lines of LiveCode scripting. And so I've built that up since 2003. You know, my tool does a lot more now than it did, you know, in the beginning. And
are you like one of the heaviest users of LiveCode in this area? Or?
I'm one of them, but there are a lot of really smart developers. I mean, Kevin and I were just talking about Trevor DeVore. You know, he's one of the top developers, you know, in the LiveCode community. He's actually in the Midwest, but actually in Southern California, there's Richard Gaskin and Todd Geist. You know Todd Geist. At least one of the features that Todd showed up here when he demoed, he said, afterwards we talked, he says, yeah, I built that feature, that graphical interface you saw, that little graphical part. I built that in LiveCode because it was simply far more straightforward to build it in LiveCode than anything else. You know, why go and build something in JavaScript? And so Todd, yeah. so Todd's a big supporter of LiveCode as well. So any other questions about LiveCode? How I got started with that? So I'm happy to share.
Well, was there anybody like David at any of your
Was there a David at any of our other meetings? No, David has only come to this meeting, and there have not been other live coders at the meetings. There will be tomorrow, though. I think there's a couple of live coders coming to the LA meeting.
Which one?
The LA one tomorrow. Yeah, we've got a user group in LA, and I think a couple of them are going to come across for that.
So anyhow, you know, I've been a big supporter of FileMaker as a product. I love FileMaker as a product. I mean, look at it. I mean, I've been using FileMaker since 1986. You know, I've got databases I've recovered from floppies, and I basically up-converted them. I can, you know, still read them today. You know, I actually have a version 1.0 Clara version of FileMaker that runs in virtual VMAX that can actually run databases, you know, from like 1990 or so. And the old Neshoba system version, I can't get that to work. It crashes under virtual VMAX. Yeah, I've got old software I wrote back in the 80s, you know, up and running, you know, on modern machines. And so, you know, that's one of the great things about FileMaker. If you need to build, in fact, I'll give you an example. I've got a customer who has an old Visual Fox Pro app. Thing's horrible. And I've convinced them to convert it to FileMaker. You know, they don't have very many users. I mean, it's not like, you know, thousands and thousands of simultaneous users. This is a sweet spot for FileMaker. They've got like 8 to 10 users, and they'll maybe grow to 25 or 50 or something like that. So I'm pitching them on the idea of, okay, my tool, FM Pro Migrator, will read your Visual Fox Pro project if they can get it decompiled, and then I will convert that into a FileMaker database because I know what the structure of a FileMaker database is. I know what the XML looks like for building a layout. I know how to build the objects on a layout. I know how to build fields, you know. I know how to build scripts, you know. It's all XML, you know, value lists are XML. And so I will basically take their solution, turn it into FileMaker database, and then I'll do consulting for them in order to really make it a real working FileMaker application. Because what they told me is, yeah, we've got this like 20-year-old Fox Pro app, and you know what? The app is horrible. We hate it. It's terrible. It doesn't even work right. So we're going to fix that, you know, after I do the conversion. And now somebody quoted them $200,000 to convert this app. And they were probably going to write it in .NET or something like that. And they don't want to pay 200 grand. I'm not going to charge it. I told them, guys, it doesn't have to be that expensive. You know, I'm going to come up with a more reasonable price for them. Well, I haven't told them the price yet. But it's not going to be that high. Because I've built similar solutions for way less than that from scratch, not starting with anything. And at least with this solution, I will have the DBF files, which will convert into FileMaker tables, you see. The hardest part is I probably am not going to be able to read any relationships out of their database, because in Fox Pro, a lot of times developers don't put relationships in their databases. They do it all in coding. So I have to work with them to literally reverse engineer the app and say, what table is related to what other table, what are the primary keys, what are the foreign keys. But it's a very reasonable effort to do that, you know, and build the app in FileMaker. And then, of course, they'll have the source code, because their previous developer refused to give them the source code. I said, guys, you're going to have the source code from day one. I'm giving you the database.
Even the $200,000 people wouldn't give them the source code?
No, they would, but the Fox Pro developer refused to give them the source code. So there's a decompiler that they're trying to run on to see if they can extract it. But anyhow, so FileMaker is a perfect solution for these kinds of apps. And then now remember, what FM Pro Migrator does is it has to do things that are different from what FileMaker does. I mean, I'm building FileMaker solutions, and so I couldn't really build FM Pro Migrator with FileMaker. Therefore, I'm using LiveCode to build FM Pro Migrator and the other tools, you know, that I built. And so, you know, as Kevin was telling you, you know, you could get low level to the operating system, do whatever you need. You know, we you know, in the FileMaker community, we like the fact that you've got the Troy, you know, file plugin and similar things. Well, you know, that kind of functionality is built right in, you know, from a very basic standpoint in LiveCode. Let's say if I want to write a preference file for my app, I can, you know, basically get the special folder path and say, oh yeah, I can get into preferences, this, that, or the other, and then I can write files, binary files, you know, right down in there, read and write wherever I need to. And so there's really no limitation. And then, you know, Kevin really didn't talk about, you know, all the features of LiveCode, because, you know, he's showing LCFM.
5,500 features in LiveCode as well, so I think we'll be here for quite a long time.
Exactly. But, you know, that's what, you know, me as an experienced developer, I go and I look at the dictionary. You know, that's my #1 source. But there's a manual that comes with it, shows you, you know, what you'd like to know. And of course, you know, as Kevin mentioned, the forums are really good too. You know, people post answers on the forums, just like in the FileMaker community. Very, very similar, very friendly community.
Good.
Yeah.
Has David been sort of a contributor in some of the things that you're doing? Or?
We looked at working together in the early stages, but there's a difference between doing a converter and a compiler. And in the end, the technology was sufficiently different that we didn't, but we do partner on projects here and there whenever we can. But on this one, it wasn't really possible in the end.
See, one of the things that I've helped Kevin with is introducing Kevin to the people in the FileMaker community. So Kevin came to the first conference in 2016. And so I took Kevin around and showed him the various booths and introduced him to people and introduced him to product managers, etc. And so that's one of the roles that I've taken on, is kind of help facilitate and help Kevin in the community. Oh, here's somebody, you know, that you should meet. You know, what was it, Richard Carlton, that, and of course Todd Geist, you know, is already a LiveCode developer. So basically, just, you know, meeting people and, you know, meeting product managers, and you know, so that's been my role, is to kind of help out, because, you know, I can bridge between the two communities. I know LiveCode, I know FileMaker, and I know, you know, who the people are, you know, various engineers to speak with, etc.
Any other questions? Still have a little bit of time left. If anybody wants to ask anything else.
What else were you doing?
What else? Well, that was it really.
2 hours.
I know, but I usually this is the shortest one so far. People usually there's usually an hour and a half of questions. So yeah, it usually runs. It's run to the end in all of the previous ones so far. So there must be things you've not asked. Oh well, that's fine. You can email us if you.
You can show us any cuts or anything.
I don't have much else, to be honest, on this. It's all in pieces at the moment. So. I don't know what I can really show you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Looking forward to it. DEFCON, right? Steve, do you want to tell us about anything about that? Well, there's not much to say about DEFCON yet.
Everything that we know, or everything that you guys need to know, is on the web. So as it gets closer, obviously we'll be sharing more stuff. But as of right now,
You're just looking for speakers at the moment, right?
that is correct.
Just for fun, you're gonna make it work on Apple Watch?
We are
Oh,
not,
man.
do not have any plans to make it work on Apple Watch. I think a little research was done. I think we did look at it, but yeah, it's pretty tough. Maybe one day we'll do something.
Do you guys provide any guidelines or rely on the community in general for, like, one of the things that is somewhat of a challenge, not a challenge, but when people are developing for FileMaker Go is developing for the screen sizes,
Yeah.
and knowing where to keep their bounds so it doesn't, scroll or bounce or anything.
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
provide any of that, or do you just rely on the Android community to provide that?
Yeah, we do provide. That's a question that comes up a lot. And obviously on the Android side, there are so many different screens and different form factors, so considerably more than there are on iOS. So yeah, I mean, we do. There are a few documents that we have up there that talk about ways to design and to think about the different form factors. There are various modes in LiveCode when you're designing a layout that scales in terms of whether you want to scale to fit, whether you want to do letterbox, a few of the other kind of modes. I don't think we've exposed those in version 1 of the compiler because I think we're just relying on whatever layout shape sizes you produce in FileMaker. So, but for the most part, if you build an iPhone layout and you're deploying to an Android phone, because the iPhones have got a few different sizes and they scale in FileMaker anyway, it's not too bad. But yeah, there is a bit more to think about. You do typically end up making maybe 1 or 2 more layouts for Android devices than you would for iOS. And that's something that you can do and just label in your FileMaker solution and then just choose to include those. Right, I think we're out of questions. So thank you all very much.
Great product.
Thanks.